So good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on completing the CSS profile. My name is Derek Terrell, and I'm the Director of Member Engagement here at the Coalition for College. Just so you all know, we are using the Zoom webinar today, and the Q&A function is enabled. Feel free to ask your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll try to address those in the Q&A portion at the end. We did have quite a few questions, though, submitted with registration, so we will try to tackle some of those first and then move to those. If this is your first time hearing about the CSS profile or attending a session with us, I also encourage you to check out some of our My Coalition counselor articles and videos all about college affordability and financial aid. And there should be some links being dropped in the chat, and you'll be able to check those out if you missed our FAFSA session a few weeks ago. So before we kick off today's session on the CSS profile, just want to share some information with you about the Coalition for College and the work that we do. So we're over 170 colleges and universities with a proven commitment to access, affordability, and student success. So we believe that Coalition schools are smart college choices because of the commitment that they all share as they're dedicated to graduating students on time with low or no debt. And that includes those who have been historically excluded and underrepresented in higher education. Members of the Coalition are able to do so, and they provide a variety of smart college choices for students to explore and apply to with a wide range of student body sizes as well as levels of selectivity. And still, they outperform national averages by about 17% when it comes to retention and graduation rates, which are very important factors to consider when you're thinking about which college you want to attend and then spend your 4 years at. So when you're looking to finalize your college list, as some of those deadlines are coming up for the seniors out there, be sure to check out the Coalition. And with that, if you haven't heard, in August, we actually launched a new application process with our partners at SCORE. So you can actually go over to SCORE and create a SCORE account, and that will help you power your college search and application process. You can search and discover schools, collaborate with your supporters, apply to, and then also keep track of your application status, all from one place inside of your SCORE account. So it's a simple place for you to go to learn about college, apply to college, and then keep track of your admissions offers. And we still provide the easy-to-use application fee waiver. So if that applies to you, you'll be able to use that as well. And so the Coalition and its members work to help students learn about, prepare for, and apply to college, as I mentioned. So feel free to follow us on Instagram to bring some of that insight and inspiration about all things college, financial aid, and affordability right to your feed. And if you have any questions, you can always reach us at info@coalitionforcollege.org. And now with that, I'm going to go ahead and let us introduce our incredible Coalition members that are joining us today. We have Bowdoin College, Pomona College, as well as University of Richmond. So before we move into the Q&A, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and then answer the question, which is, what do you enjoy most about talking to students and families about college and affordability? And I will start with Mike.
Okay. Good evening, everyone from Maine. My name is Mike Albano. I'm the Assistant Vice President and Director of Student Financial Aid at Bowdoin College in Brunswick. And I would have to say, in regards to the question, I think we're a unique office and in the profession of financial aid. When we talk about affordability, we really try to talk about it from the context of not just during the admission process, but we really do form a plan, and we really form relationships with families, not just 4 years at an institution like Bowdoin, but we really do for 5 years and beyond. So I think that's probably the most enjoyable thing in seeing success in the future.
Awesome. We'll hand it over to Jessica.
Oh, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Dominguez. I am an associate director at Pomona College. I've been here for just about 10 years now. So love it at Pomona. And I'm coming live from California, where I'm hearing there's some bad weather in other parts. So hoping that y'all stay warm. But to answer your question, I think I just love the opportunity to demystify the financial aid process for both parents and students. I think that's really important work. I also, really enjoy the opportunity that Pomona and institutions like Pomona have to make college both attainable and affordable for families. And being able to educate students on the resources that are offered at institutions like Pomona is definitely what I enjoy about my work here.
And then last but not least, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Weinberg-Rue, and I'm the compliance officer for the financial aid office at the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia. I would say that the best part about working with students and families is helping them like through the entire college process. Like my colleagues have said, we really do try to help our students throughout their entire 4 years and even beyond. I always like to tell people that I was myself a student at the University of Richmond who was receiving financial aid, and I worked as a student assistant all throughout my undergrad years as well as in law school. And then now I work there because I just love it so much. So it's a true passion to be able to develop relationships with the students that we help. And sometimes that can really turn into a really great mentorship experience as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you all, for those introductions. So we're going to go ahead and get into a question and answer portion here. Once again, just want to remind everyone who is tuned in that you can use the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you have throughout the presentation. But I'm going to kick this off and ask Jessica the first question. Since we are here talking about completing the CSS profile, could you share with us what the CSS profile even is and why would a student need to fill it out?
Yeah, thank you so much. So the CSS profile is used to determine institutional financial aid or eligibility for financial aid. So much like you complete the FAFSA to determine your federal aid eligibility, which could be anywhere from a Pell Grant to a state grant, as well as loans, the CSS profile is used at some institutions like a Pomona College to determine what students are eligible for in institutional aid. The CSS profile does gather additional information that the FAFSA doesn't, which allows these institutions to have a clearer picture of the family's finances.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And since we've been talking about the FAFSA as well, Rachel, could you actually share with us what the difference between the CSS profile and the FAFSA actually is?
Yes, so as Jessica started to allude to, the FAFSA is really primarily used to determine federal need. So that's for like the federal Pell Grant, federal direct loans, as well as like federal work study. And so the main difference between the two is that the FAFSA is a bit simpler. In fact, in the next couple of years, they're going to be overhauling the way that they look at the financial aid application altogether and changing that metric. Whereas the CSS profile is primarily used to determine institutional eligibility. So that's things like university-based need grants. And those are going to be the most impactful at like the more expensive private universities. And it's going to make up more of the financial aid package for most of the students. So it is a little bit more complicated and it has many more questions than the FAFSA does. So it will require families to really sit down with their tax returns for the applicable year to be able to fill that out. Whereas the FAFSA has what's called the IRS data retrieval tool, which allows students to pull their tax data from the applicable year to make it a bit easier. The CSS profile doesn't have that, so it really is very helpful for families to have their tax returns with them as they're filling out the CSS profile.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So one quick question, as I know that I mentioned earlier that there are a lot of deadlines coming up for admissions and for applications. Mike, could you share a little bit about deadlines for the CSS profile, or is there a deadline or is there a priority deadline?
Yeah, so in terms of deadlines, it's not so much about the CSS profile and a deadline. There certainly is a period of time in which the application becomes available. Typically that's on or around October 1st with the CSS profile. Sometimes it becomes available a little bit earlier than the FAFSA in this year and prior years. But the big thing, I think, that the big takeaway rather is that the deadline for CSS profile is really contingent upon the institutions that you're applying to for aid and admission. And we certainly, as institutions, we try to put those deadlines on our websites and in our communications, obviously, but we also try to put some baseline deadlines on the CSS profile. So as you complete it, you can see priority deadlines and whatnot. But I think the thing I always tell families is to always look at the institutional websites for the best guidance.
Thanks so much, Mike. I know you had started to talk about this, Jessica, but can you kind of give a general overview of the steps that actually go into filling out the CSS profile?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So before you start, you definitely want to visit cssprofile.org. They do have a lot of helpful information as well. So I'd say before you even get started, check out the information that they have, the application resources that are available. And then before completing the application, I think Rachel had mentioned this, just have your tax returns available. It's definitely going to help out, especially because the CSS profile does not have that option to transfer your parents' tax information and income information to the application itself. It's important to be prepared and have that information handy. That includes parent tax returns, W-2s, and any other statements that are associated with their tax returns. And then you'll move into just completing the application, enter the required information for both yourself and your parent or parents. And then again, the College Board has a lot of resources available. So if you ever get stuck or you have questions, definitely reach out. Once the application is submitted, the schools that you added as part of your application will receive that information.
Thanks, Jessica. And I know that I had asked you earlier, Rachel, about the difference between the CSS profile and the FAFSA, but someone who submitted a question wanted to know, is the CSS profile harder or easier to fill out than the FAFSA?
I would say that it is a little bit harder because it asks for more detailed information. I wouldn't worry too much though, like as you're filling it out, just do your best and like try to track exactly what's on your tax return. And if you have any questions, definitely ask like either the school or your counselor. But honestly, just provide the best answers that you can, because most of the schools that do require the CSS profile are also going to require you to submit your tax returns as well. So if you accidentally make some mistakes, that's okay if you don't catch those, because we will be comparing the answers to the CSS profile to the tax returns that are provided as well.
Thank you, Rachel. So I see a question that came into the Q&A, and I want to throw this out there because through your SCORE account, whether you're applying for first-year admission or transfer admission, you're still able to use that and apply via the coalition. So a question that came in was, how does the CSS profile differ, if at all, for transfer applicants to college? And I'm going to throw that question over to Mike.
Thank you. So in terms of the CSS profile and transfer admission, I think, again, going back to deadlines in financial aid, we like to talk about deadlines. I think that's the biggest thing to pay attention to. Again, checking the institutional websites for which you're applying to. But in terms of the profile and transfer admission, certainly what the CSS profile has in it is a pretty robust skip logic. So it is going to prompt you and ask you potentially if you're applying as a transfer applicant. But other than that, in terms of the profile itself, it's really not much different than being a first-year student or a returning student if your institution is going to require the CSS profile again for upper class years.
Great, thanks so much. So Rachel, a question came in and I'm gonna throw it to you because it's about the CSS profile and the difference between FAFSA. So does the CSS profile also use prior year tax returns as the FAFSA does?
Yes, it does. So it tracks and it uses the same year that the FAFSA does. I will say that many schools do use professional judgment in order to take special circumstances into account. So for many students, that particular year that it's asking for, so if you're applying for fall of 2023, it's asking for 2021 financial information. If that's not going to be an accurate reflection of your financial circumstances or your of your family's like current assets, I would definitely like reach out to the particular schools you're applying to let them know of your special circumstances in case that's not going to be an accurate reflection of what's going on currently in 2022.
Thanks, Rachel. So it looks like there is a little bit of confusion. I'm looking at the Q&A, and someone was asking about filling out the CSS profile within their SCORE account. So those are two different things. And do you mind reiterating, Jessica, where a student would go to fill out the CSS profile?
Yeah, definitely. So you want to, let me actually pull up the link here. But it's actually cssprofile.org. So I don't know if we could put that in the chat, but cssprofile.org, that's where you're going to start. You'll have to create an account if you haven't already created a College Board account. I know for students who have already created one, they can kind of link to the profile through that existing account, but that's where you want to start.
Awesome. Thank you so much for clarifying that for us. The next question that I have, I'll send over to Mike. So how will a student know if a school has received their CSS profile after they've submitted it?
Yep. So in terms of the record of the school receiving it, the best thing I can suggest is make sure you take advantage of each institution's application portal or admission portal. Because what happens after you complete the CSS profile is that it's completed, College Board processes the information, and then it's sent to the schools. And then we, in turn, put it into our financial aid management systems, which also typically feed into the application portal for admission. There's usually a financial aid tab of sorts. So the best way to keep track of things is to check those portals. So really about dates and portals and making sure documents are received.
Thank you, Mike. Jessica, so there are a couple of questions about who fills out the CSS profile. I know during our FAFSA session, we already kind of talked about US citizens as well as permanent residents would fill out the FAFSA, but not international students. Can you tell us who is able to fill out the CSS profile?
Yes, thank you. So CSS profile is available for both domestic and international students, as well as DACA or undocumented students. So there are some students, once you go through the process, kind of like how Mike mentioned, there is skip logic built into there. So if for whatever reason the CSS profile can't take your parents' income information, you just want to reach out to the institution you're applying for. Some institutions have what they call an ISFA, which is an application for international students to provide us basically the same information, but maybe you weren't able to complete that on the CSS profile.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then this question I'm going to throw out to Rachel. So one of the attendees wanted to know if it would be possible to hear a little bit more about what the additional information the CSS profile seeks that the FAFSA does not.
So you're going to have like more detailed information from the tax return directly. So on the FAFSA, it might look at like very basic things like AGI, parent wages, and things like that, whereas the CSS profile will go into more detail. So it'll ask for things like untaxed income, tax deferred pensions, IRA distributions, and it will ask for like business information that you don't get as much on the FAFSA. The FAFSA does ask for business value for companies where there are 100 employees or more. That's usually not the case for most students, so that ends up being a question that gets skipped by most people on the FAFSA. Whereas on the CSS profile, if the family has any kind of business assets, those are going to be reported regardless of the size of the company. So it's just more detailed, and it provides, asks for things like home equity, as well as more detail on the students' demographics as well.
Thanks, Rachel. So a question that I have for you, Mike, because we were talking about deadlines and submitting things. So one of the attendees wanted to know, is it appropriate to reach out to the financial aid office if you have a change of circumstances prior to getting an acceptance? So I'm assuming that's after you've submitted FAFSA and CSS profile. If something changes, should they reach out to the financial aid office?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be the quick answer to that. But I think with the CSS profile too, you do have the opportunity initially to provide additional information in the special circumstances section. And it's pretty robust in terms of the number of characters or the length of for which you can enter information. But I think if something changes after that, certainly reach out to us. Sometimes it might just be an email to let us know and we'll put it to your file. But sometimes families need a little bit more assurance in terms of what we might need potentially, or just does this fit into something that we need to know with the application. So most financial aid offices, we're there Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5, year round. Given the past couple of years in the world, we're actually, in my opinion, more accessible than we've ever been, given the various formats that we can communicate with, Zoom being one of them. So truly, no question's a bad question or a concern or a follow-up. So I would reach out. That's what we're there for.
Thanks, Mike. A question that came in with registration that I want to ask Jessica. So I know you had mentioned all the different types of students that could fill out the FAFSA, or that could fill out the CSS profile, but someone wanted to know if the student happens to be a U.S. citizen, but their parents are not, would they still fill out the CSS profile? And is there anything special that they need to do for that?
Yeah, so definitely the student would go ahead and complete the CSS profile, provide income information. If parents are not US citizens or if they're living abroad, we have situations like that as well. They just want to provide income information for parents. So if that means parents are filing a tax return, then they'll submit a tax return. But if they have income statements, if parents are living abroad or living out of the country, they'll just want to make sure to provide any income information that they have.
Thank you. And then this question I'm going to ask to Rachel because it goes back to something that you already said. So if a student and their family haven't, or they weren't able to file taxes, or they can't access their tax returns through the IRS data retrieval tool, how would they go about filling out the CSS profile?
I would say, like, with whatever financial documentation that they do have for that year, to make their best guess as to what to fill out. One thing they could do is request an IRS tax return transcript or a tax wage statement from the IRS to be able to assist with some of those data elements. It won't have everything that the CSS profile asks for, but it's a good place to start if they don't have anything. And then they can also contact their individual financial aid offices too, because usually we're very willing to work with people, and we understand that there are circumstances that prohibit some families from being able to provide some documentation. So some schools will have different requirements for what to do in that situation. So it's good to have that conversation if you're able to contact the separate schools.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. Mike, one of the questions that was submitted beforehand was about the CSS non-custodial waiver form. Do you mind telling us what the CSS non-custodial waiver form is, and then how would someone fill that out and submit it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the CSS profile and institutions that use it, not every institution has the same aid application process or requirements, but if they do require information from what is called the non-custodial parent, what will normally happen is that you will complete a CSS profile for the custodial household, or based on how we phrase it, the parent for which you live with the majority of the year. And then there's the non-custodial parent. And most institutions, Bowdoin and Pomona and others, we do require information from both biological or adoptive parents. And what the petition does is that if there is an extenuating circumstance for which the non-custodial parent is not able to complete the requirements, or there's a really irretrievable relationship, I guess is another way to put it. If there's something along the lines of that, what the College Board has done probably now for the past 5 years is that there's a common non-custodial waiver form. And what that would require is a lot of detailed personal information, for sure, in terms of the relationship or lack thereof with the non-custodial parent. And typically institutions will require that form along with a statement from the student, and as well third-party documentation to support the non-custodial petition. And what that does in turn is it gives it to us, and we put it through our appeals committees typically to try to see if we have the ability to waive the non-custodial parent, is the common term you'll have, or waive the requirements for institutional financial aid. And I just want to make clear that's for institutional financial aid only. That's not for financial aid eligibility for the FAFSA or the free application for federal student aid. And typically it's probably one of the most common questions that we get, where there's a lot of concern, and the process certainly does take some time during the admission cycle. So I would say be patient, check your application portal, make sure those documents are received. And certainly if you do have concerns about the status thereof or information, reach out.
Awesome. So I heard you say that the FAFSA stands for the free application for federal student aid. So Jessica, this question is for you, and wondering, are there any fees associated with filling out and submitting the CSS profile? And if so, how could someone go about getting a fee waiver?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, there is a fee associated with the CSS profile, and that's $25 for the initial application, and then it's $16 for each additional school. And if someone knows how many schools the $25, I can't think off the top of my head, and I didn't write it in my notes, but then it's $25 for the initial application, then $16 for the additional applications after whatever the first 25 covers. There is a fee waiver that the College Board provides, and they recently added additional I would say assistance for families by increasing the total adjusted gross income that families can make in order to apply to be eligible for that fee waiver. So first-year domestic graduate students whose family's adjusted gross income is up to $100,000 are eligible for the fee waiver. Also, any students who are eligible for the SAT waiver as well would be eligible for the fee waiver, and that would include fees for completing any number of CSS profile. I think that is all I had, unless someone had an update on that. How many schools the $25 covered? Mike has it.
I'm pretty sure it's just one, and then after that it's $16 for each school. If I remember correctly, I tried to do a quick little Google there, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I believe you are correct. The next question I have is for Rachel, and it is: does a student have to fill out the CSS profile every year?
Generally, yes. I'm not sure of any schools that allow you to only fill it out the first year, but at least for University of Richmond, we do require that returning students fill it out each year, since we will be reevaluating aid based on the new tax year. For our non-custodial families, though, we only require the non-custodial household to fill out the CSS profile the first year, and then we use that information for the following 3 years if the student matriculates. But that's going to be on a school by school basis, so I would double check with each school.
Awesome. There was a question that was also submitted around IDOC. So Mike, could you tell us what IDOCs are or is? And then if a school is using that, they wanted to know why they also request information separately from that.
Yeah, so IDOC is a service of the College Board that complements CSS profile, and essentially what it is a secure, I don't want to call it a one-stop in a way, but it is kind of a method or a mechanism to, if you complete the CSS profile and multiple schools participate in the IDOC service, instead of having to send, for example, multiple copies of parent tax returns or W-2s or other forms, if schools participate in IDOC, what you can do is you can upload that information once, and then all the schools that participate in IDOC will get that information. So it certainly lightens the application complexity there. And what happens from there is that when you complete the CSS profile, the opportunity to use IDOC will open up, and it will tell you what institutions are participating. And the bigger reason why sometimes institutions still require other information to be submitted to them outside of IDOC is that think about the system as servicing quite a few number of schools, Bowdoin and many others included. So IDOC can only accept so many things and send them to us with a level of accuracy as to this is a tax return, this is a W-2. So if we ask for additional information that might not fit into that, all schools typically have a secure portal because we want to be mindful of personally identifiable information, things that would be risky. We do not want families to ever email us tax returns or items with social security numbers on it. I thought I'd throw that in there right there. But that's why sometimes schools will ask for information be submitted through another means besides IDOC.
Thank you, Mike. Another question that came in. So if a student and their guardians or parents are having trouble completing the CSS profile or really any part of it, including the non-custodial parent section, do you all know of any resources or anywhere that they could go or who they should reach out to if they're having any difficulties? I'm gonna throw that over to Rachel.
So I would suggest honestly reaching out to one of the financial aid offices at one of the schools you've applied to, because we are more than happy to like sit down with families, like if they would prefer to do it in person, like we're able to do that. And even if you're applying to multiple schools, like we would still be able to pair you with one of our financial aid advisors to go through the process. And if that's not possible to do it in person, we can do it over Zoom, we can do it over a phone call. Generally, we're very happy to be able to walk students and families through that process. Some families will also go to their like specific high school counselors, and there are other groups that help out students as well. But honestly, you can just go straight towards the financial aid offices because we're generally like a really great group in this type of work. So just reach out, and most people will be happy to like set up an appointment so that you can go through it with them.
I would agree. I think you all are a great group of folks. So please do not hesitate to reach out to any of the financial aid folks, because I know a lot of them are very, very happy to help.
I was just going to add to that too. And I was going to say that I think we unmuted at the same time, Rachel, but I was going to say the same thing. Please do reach out to us. But the College Board also has a FAQ section on their website. So sometimes if you get stuck, and we do get inundated with emails during our admission cycle. And so as much as we'd like to get back to students who are worried about their application, sometimes it does take some time for us to be able to respond to emails and phone calls. So I would say that would be another great resource for students to just go in the FAQ section that the College Board has, because maybe some of their questions could be answered there as well.
And I think that's a great piece to go back to Mike's point about making sure that you stick to the deadlines. So reaching out frantically to an admissions office the day of the deadline probably is not going to be the best idea, but starting a little bit earlier and then reaching out with those questions will help ease that process a bit. So Mike, it looks like a question came in, and since you answered about the IDOC, I'm going to ask this one to you. So can you fill out the IDOC only and not the CSS profile, or do you have to complete both?
So that's an interesting question. So typically no, in terms of that. So CSS profile completion unlocks, for lack of another term, unlocks the ability to access IDOC. There are some schools, I can't call out certain ones because everyone does things a little bit differently. Some schools that might not require the CSS profile in the returning student or the renewal of financial aid application cycle for upper class years, they might not require the CSS profile, but they might on their own initiative activate IDOC for those students. Typically, it's students who are very high need where we don't need a CSS profile again. And only in that instance is when IDOC potentially could be opened up. But otherwise, if you're applying for admission, that would not be the case.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. I wanted to go back to something, Rachel, I think that you had said about filling out your tax forms. So if someone does not file taxes, they can still fill out the CSS profile. Is that correct?
Yes, if you don't file taxes, it'll actually be a lot easier to fill out the CSS profile because there'll be a lot of zeros. But what you would want to make sure that you do complete would be like the income information. So for parent wages, if the parents had any income for that year, there's also a non-tax filer statement that you can print out and fill out on the CSS profile website. For the IDOC portion, if you don't have like the tax returns to be able to provide, and that's very helpful. For IDOC as well, you'd want to submit W-2s for that year if you have them, or 1099s, like if you have like 1099 income. So whatever you can provide, you do want to try to do your best to fill out the CSS profile to the best of your ability. But if that means that there are going to be a lot of blank spots, that's fine too. It also might be helpful to utilize that special circumstances section on the CSS profile to explain that, so that if administrator is looking at your CSS profile and is wondering where that information is, they'll see that you didn't have a tax return filed in that year, and they'd understand that there are going to be some blanks on there.
Awesome. And thank you for mentioning the special circumstances. So do you all mind sharing what some special circumstances might be? I know one of the questions that was submitted asked if sudden expenses like something medical related, would that count as a special circumstance? If maybe Jessica, you can share what some special circumstances might be that students and parents would fill out.
Sure, definitely. And I think every institution processes special circumstances differently, but I think some of the common ones are definitely medical expenses. If the family had medical expenses in the year that they're applying for, financial aid, definitely reach out to the financial aid office. Care for elderly parents. So your parents caring for grandparents and expenses associated with that are definitely a common one. Common special circumstance that we see. Loss in income. So like Rachel had mentioned earlier, it's prior year income. So for students who are applying for fall 23, we are looking at 2021 income, but that may not be an accurate reflection of the family's finances currently. So there may have been like a loss of job or loss of income. So we do see that a lot. And those are kind of some of the common ones that I can think of offhand.
Great, thank you so much. Another question that came in. So for the FAFSA, we found out a couple weeks ago that parents have to create an account as well as students, and they have separate IDs. Does the same thing hold true for the CSS profile, Mike? And who is filling it out? Is it the student filling it out? Is it the parent? Is it the guardian? Is it everyone together? Could you give some clarity around that for us?
Yeah, and I might actually call upon my colleagues because just like application fees, we as aid practitioners, we kind of get caught behind the scenes with things. So, and things have changed a lot over the past couple of years to try to help streamline things. So the College Board has really tried to streamline the ID process. So when you complete the CSS profile as the student, in terms of the information for the custodial household, you're relying upon the same ID that you might have used for SAT or other things. So when you fill that out, it's really the student's ID, and the parent is helping by provide the information there. Certainly, there's been a little bit of a transition over the years where students have had to recreate IDs, especially for our returning students. But in the case of a non-custodial parent, that is a separate application that protects the information of the non-custodial parent and respects the information of that custodial household. So in that case, that's when two accounts are required to pair that information together, and the systems that the College Board has in place allow that to happen, where, again, the information of both households or both parents is kept confidential there. And I will turn it over to Jess or Rachel if I missed anything there, because we've had, just like the world, we've had lots of changes in terms of authentication, usernames, and passwords as well.
I don't think I had anything to add. I think you got it all, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for being thorough, Mike. So a question that came in, and I'm going to ask Jessica to maybe answer this. It seems like there is a thought that schools require CSS profile for all applicants, even if the student will not qualify for need-based aid. Is that true? And also another question that goes along with that is, will a parent's income disqualify a student for aid?
All great questions. So we really don't know if you're eligible for need-based aid until you complete the application materials, right? And this is a common question that we get in our office, Derek, is like, should I even complete the applications? My parents' income seems to be a little on the higher end. We don't think we're going to be eligible. And we just always encourage students, like when you're applying to different colleges, most colleges have a net price calculator or some type of calculator on their website. And those are very helpful. I always tell students and parents, have your tax returns with you when you're completing these calculators, because the more accurate information you put into the calculator, the more accurate information it's going to give back to you. And so if you have those tax returns available, you can visit Pomona's net price calculator, plug in your income information, and get an idea of what a financial aid package may look like. There may be situations where families will do that and it'll say, hey, based on this information, it's not looking like you're going to be eligible for need-based financial aid. But there are other institutions who offer merit-based aid as well. So just keeping your options open. But I never discourage families from applying for financial aid. I think even if you're on that cusp and the net price calculator on that institution's website is saying that you're not getting aid, kind of like we all talked about earlier, there are special circumstances. And so definitely I encourage you to apply and then have the conversation with those offices that you're applying to.
Thank you, Jessica. I want to kind of throw this out to all of you all. Does your school require the CSS profile to be submitted prior to admission, or with the application, after the application, or after being accepted? And I'll let each of you all answer that, starting with Rachel.
So for our school, they are almost at the same time. So it depends on like which admission cycle you're applying for. So for example, our early decision, early action deadline for admissions was November 1st, but then the financial aid applications were due November 15th. Similarly for regular decision, those applications are due February 1st, whereas the financial aid portion is February 15th. So there's a little bit of leeway there in between, but we generally try to get the financial aid decisions out around the same time as the admissions decisions do. So we definitely want that information prior to the admissions decision going out so that we can give you that information to aid in your college decision-making process.
And what about at Pomona?
Yeah, so Pomona is a little different. We actually mirror admissions deadlines. And so for our early decision one, our admissions deadline was November 15th. And that same deadline, November 15th, was for financial aid as well. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure if a student is admitted and they've submitted all of their financial aid application materials, that they receive their financial aid award, if eligible, at the same time that they receive their admission to the college. So it is kind of easier for us to have those conversations because application for admission is the same time that they're submitting their application for financial aid as well.
And then how about at Bowdoin, Mike?
Yep. So in terms of Bowdoin, we pretty much mirror Pomona. Obviously for many reasons, given how closely, in terms of peer schools we are, but it's the same here. And I think one thing, taking Bowdoin or Pomona or any school out of the equation, sometimes it also depends upon the nature of the admission process. So of course, here at Bowdoin, we're need blind for admission. And in terms of that, how that relates to aid is that the aid process, students are, from a need blind perspective, a family's ability to pay for college is not taken into account during the admission process. And in terms of deadlines and how that relates to completing the CSS profile at a school that is not need blind or need aware, as the common term is, that could have an impact because that does factor into the admission decision. So for schools like Bowdoin, we obviously have deadlines for a reason. We're certainly flexible and amendable to things being, past due, and we don't penalize families for turning in things late. But as I think we've all pointed out, we do this for a reason, to try to facilitate a process that is not stressful in terms of the application deadlines. And also, if you're offered admission, it gives you the time to work through a pretty important decision.
Can I just add something to that? Thank you so much for mentioning that, Mike, because it is really important, right? We are actually need blind for domestic applicants. However, we are need aware for international students. So it's even more important for international students to get their stuff in on time, because admissions needs to know, what the need is of that student before they can make a decision. And so that does definitely affect that. So thank you so much for mentioning that, because I think it's important for students to know to check the websites of the schools they're applying to, because if they are need aware and they have those deadlines, we definitely want to meet those deadlines.
Awesome. Thank you all. So this question came in. So we do have some folks on the call who might be applying for first year or for transfer. We also have some domestic as well as international students. So when filling out the CSS profile, would they do that in US dollars or in their country's currency? Mike, I see you smiling over there.
Yeah, I'm smiling because at Bowdoin and my prior institutions, I routinely work with international students. And in terms of how that works from the CSS profile perspective, in terms of the skip logic and the technology that drives the CSS profile, you're going to be asked to report once you identify what country you're from and what your country's currency is. It's going to, behind the scenes, do the currency conversion. So when we get the profile information on the school side, it's going to have converted your home currency to US currency. So the answer is, when you do the CSS profile, you're going to be doing it in your home currency, and then it will convert over when we get the profile data.
Thank you, Mike. One quick thing that I want to ask, because I do see that there are quite a few international students asking questions here. What is the importance of filling out the CSS profile or applying for aid in the first year? If a student doesn't in the first year, does that disqualify them from receiving aid in the following years? And this is pertaining to international students in particular. I'm going to pass it to Jessica first, and then let anyone else hop in with that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Derek. So it really depends on the institution and, what their policy is. So our policy at Pomona, and this is an admissions policy, so it's not a financial aid policy, but because we are need aware for international students will need to let us know if they're applying for aid at the time of admission. So if international students do not say that they are applying for aid, they cannot apply in subsequent years. And that's just a policy that we have in admissions. But again, important to check in with other institutions that you're applying to, because their policies may differ.
Awesome. I think I'll let Rachel. Yeah.
So at our school, it's very similar. We ask that our international students only have to actually fill out the CSS profile their first year, because it is need aware for us as well, but need blind for domestic students. Generally, we don't allow our international students to fill out a need-based financial aid application in subsequent years if they did not fill it out their first year. However, at our school, we do allow for some special circumstances. So if something happens where the family's finances are really different for whatever reason, so like if the primary income earner were to lose their job or something like that, we would consider looking at them for need-based financial aid, even though generally our policy is not to do that. So it really does depend on the circumstances and on the specific school that the student applies to.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here in terms of Bowdoin, and very much in prior years, very much like Pomona, this is our first year or application cycle rather at Bowdoin, where we have gone need blind for international students. So our change in admission policy has led to us changing aid in a way where it has now opened up the opportunity for returning students to ask for financial aid consideration in upper class years if family circumstances change. And what that's done also is that international students will have to reapply for aid every year, unlike prior where it was one time. And so it's really opened up access for international students at the college, with the only exception is that since we have a lot of transfer students potentially on the Zoom tonight, is that international transfers, there is no financial aid opportunities at Bowdoin for international transfer students. So that's the one population that is not eligible for aid from us. But otherwise, this is a new normal for us at Bowdoin. We're pretty proud of it, and it's certainly generated lots of questions with our returning students and our applicants as well.
Awesome. So I'm definitely hearing across the board that students need to make sure that they look at the specific schools that they're applying to and make sure that they're hitting those deadlines as well as those specific requirements. So thank you all for that. A couple of questions have come in about what to do if they've missed the deadline already for filing the CSS profile. Should they go ahead and do it, or should they not? And then another one is, if they make a mistake on the CSS profile after already submitting it, what should they do to rectify or fix this? Rachel?
As far as deadlines go, I feel like a broken record in that it's really going to depend on which school that you're, applying to and their particular policies. For University of Richmond, we're honestly pretty lenient with the deadline. So if you miss it by a few weeks, just reach out to us, and that's going to be okay for the most part. But the best advice I can give in that instance would be, if you know that there's going to be issues filling this out, or if you foresee that you're going to have problems getting the documentation that you need, just let the schools know, because we're going to be much more forgiving with those students who keep us in the loop. Whereas if you wait and then it's a month later and you haven't told us what's going on, and then you say, oh, I've been having issues, some schools aren't going to be as flexible at that point. So you should keep them in the loop if you anticipate any problems or if you're having any problems. And most schools are going to be willing to work with you on that. And then what was the second question again?
It was, if they've made a mistake after they've already submitted the CSS profile to you, what should they do?
There are limited cases where you can update the CSS profile now. That's kind of a new rule. And off the top of my head, I cannot remember which items you're able to correct. But generally, if you have made a mistake, you can also reach out to the individual schools as well to let them know. And then they can make adjustments to the profile on their end in their system to be able to recalculate based on that correction.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So there is a question that came in, and I'm glad that this was asked because the question is, what is the criteria to be considered an international student in terms of financial aid? Do you mind answering that, Jessica?
Sure, thank you. That's a tough one. So we have a field in our system that tells us whether a student is being considered an international or domestic student for admissions, because that kind of drives our policy that we just talked about, right? If a student didn't apply, during the admission cycle and they were admitted and then they're applying later, if that field says that admissions consider them as not a necessarily domestic, meaning that they're a citizen, but they consider them as a non-international student, then we would be able to receive an application even if the student is not living in the States. So just wanted to point that out, but can you remind me of the question again? I'm so sorry. As I was talking, I kind of lost it a little bit.
No. So basically wondering how do they know if they're an international student? So if they're a U.S. citizen attending school outside of the U.S., would they be considered international, or would they still be considered domestic? Or if you are an international student, or a student who holds a visa and passport from another country, but you've done all your schooling in the U.S., would they be international or would they be domestic?
Right. And I think it's just the policy of the institution. So at Pomona, in that last situation, that student would be considered a domestic, kind of like what I just had mentioned earlier, even though maybe the student is not a U.S. citizen, but did all of their schooling in the States, we would consider them domestic for that process. But really, it's just a matter of the institution's policy of what is considered an international student. For us, for the most part, it's students who are living outside of the U.S. who are not U.S. citizens are for the most part considered international students. And I don't know if my colleagues here had anything to add to that.
I'll jump in really quick. So I think one thing that you want to keep in mind for both the CSS profile and the admission process, as Jessica pointed out, is that if for some reason you're a US citizen living abroad, because that's another piece that sometimes can be a little confusing and complicated. Again, as Jessica pointed out, it's really going back to your citizenship status, and that's what drives the process. But so much like what was mentioned already, when students apply for admission, we get that information, and it's either international or domestic or US citizen. And that also in turn drives the aid process in terms of those documents that we've talked about at length today as to what we require. So it's super important to complete the admission application process correctly, but then it's also just as equally important with the CSS profile to ask those questions if you're uncertain as to how to answer them too, because profile, as we've talked about a little bit for international students, is very different in a lot of ways in the prompts versus US citizens. So I would just be mindful of both those processes because they really do drive our systems. And if something doesn't look right in our systems for whatever reason, admission or financial aid, that's again an opportunity to reach out to us just to make sure we have things right.
All right, thanks so much, Mike. And we are running low on time, so I want to give each one of you all an opportunity to kind of leave one piece of advice for the students and the families that are on right now. But it looks like a lot of the questions that are still in the Q&A, though, are very unique and special circumstances to each individual person. And we all know that finances and financial situations usually are like that. So I know that Jessica mentioned earlier, making sure to check out the FAQ section of that. But then also, as Rachel said too, feel free to reach out to the schools that you are actually applying to. And as Mike said, make sure that you leave enough time so that you meet those deadlines. So with that, I'm going to ask each of you all to just leave us with a piece of advice, and we will go backwards. So I think we ended with Rachel last time. So we'll do Rachel, Jessica, and then Mike.
My piece of advice would be to pick up the phone and really just talk to someone if you're in doubt with anything, because at our school, we have a specific financial aid advisor assigned to any given file, and that person works very closely with each of their students. And sometimes it could be very helpful for both the family as well as a financial aid office to really get some context for the information that's been provided, because we do understand, like, the student and the family is more than just like the information they put on their application, but we don't know what we don't know. So if you feel like there's something that might be relevant, but you're not sure, we always ask that students send us like an email or a written letter, like whatever they would like to be able to supplement their application so that we're aware. When families fill out the CSS profile special circumstances section, we review those very carefully. And so if there's something that we can make an adjustment for or take into consideration, we will reach out to families, but it's even better if the families can reach out to us proactively so that we can have that conversation so you're not confused.
Hand it over to Jessica.
All right. Well, I think I will leave you with this bit of advice, as I think, and I give this a lot to my students. I have a son who is 22 years old who has gone through this process, and my daughter is a junior in high school. And so I've advised her the same way, as just be prepared and prepare ahead of time. And so as a junior in high school, she has her top 10 colleges, and I've made her research those colleges. What type of financial aid do they provide? What types of programs, are, at that institution, and what is it that you're looking for? So I think being prepared always helps. We do have a lot of resources on our website. And so doing research and then just looking for the schools, view their financial aid page and see, their FAQ section. We work really hard as financial aid administrators to put our information out there, to be transparent about our processes. And so there is a lot of good information on, different institutions' websites. But then also, I will echo what Rachel said, is if you're ever in doubt and you've gone through all those channels and you still have questions and you have, like you mentioned, Derek, those special circumstances, please do reach out. We understand that there is a person behind that application, there's a family behind that tax return. And we definitely want to open up the opportunity for students to share their special circumstances, and institutions like Pomona and private institutions who do give a lot of their own institutional aid to students are able to take those things into consideration. So I would say definitely have a voice, definitely share that information with the financial aid offices. I've been in financial aid for almost 10 years now, and it breaks my heart when I have a student come in my office and they struggled and they were working 2 jobs and they, maxed out in loans, only to find out that had they have gone and come in and talked to me a little earlier about their situation, we would have been able to help. And so definitely have those questions, do your research, and good luck to all of you.
Yeah, and I will equally echo the words of my colleagues tonight. Dates, deadlines, communication, and I think the one thing when we talk about, tell us your story is kind of the line I use a lot of the times in high school financial aid nights or financial aid conversations, especially the special circumstances section. That's huge in the communication piece. And also know that when we're going through this admission process too, there's a lot of questions we want to ask. But obviously, given the admission process, we're also working behind the scenes to have things be in tandem with admission decisions. So that's why the communication is so important, because we might not be able to act on something or ask a question initially, but once those admission decisions go out in the affirmative, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, because that gives us the open opportunity to start the communication, either you reaching out to us or us reaching out to you as well, to try to get a better sense of things. Because our jobs are really to help maximize your eligibility for need-based aid, because that's our job and we want to do it in a fair and equitable way, of course, too. But I think that's probably the best advice I could give in closing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Rachel. And a big thank you to all the students, families, guardians, and folks who were on the call tonight. As they mentioned, if you have any questions as you're filling out your CSS profile, there are FAQs as well as real life people like the ones that you see before you here tonight, who are open and willing to help you with that process. So feel free to reach out. And as always, if you have any other questions for us, you can reach us via our info box as well. But with that, I'll go ahead and close and wish everyone a good night or good day wherever you are in the world. All right. See ya. Thanks, y'all.